It is the 26th of January, 1945, and the fields around Holtzwihr in the Colmar pocket of eastern France are buried under snow the color of gunmetal. The temperature sits somewhere below -10. A young American lieutenant, barely out of his teens, stands beside a burning tank destroyer alone. Behind him, in a tree line some hundreds of meters back, the remains of his company watch in disbelief. Ahead of him, across open, snow-blanketed ground, 6 German tanks grind forward, and behind those tanks come waves of infantry, perhaps 250 men in total, advancing with the confidence of soldiers who believe the position in front of them has already been abandoned. He has just ordered every one of his men to fall back to prepared positions in the woods. He himself has stayed. The tank destroyer beside him, an M10, has taken a direct hit and is alight, its crew already gone, its ammunition liable to detonate at any moment. He climbs onto it anyway. He swings the exposed .50-caliber machine gun mounted on its turret towards the advancing Germans, and he begins to fire. For the best part of an hour, this one man, roughly 168 centimeters tall and weighing barely 50 kilograms, will hold that ground on his own, directing artillery by field telephone with one hand and firing a heavy machine gun with the other, while German infantry close to within 10 meters of his position from 3 sides at once. What happens on that ridge above Holtzwihr will become one of the most extraordinary single actions of the Second World War, and it will turn a poor farm boy from Texas into the most decorated American combat soldier in his nation's history. His name is Audie Murphy, and to understand why this moment matters, you first have to understand just how badly the war had already broken him before he ever climbed onto that tank. By January 1945, the war in Europe had entered its grinding, exhausted final act. The German offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, had only just been contained, and Hitler's forces were now attempting something similar in Alsace, a last determined effort to hold the west bank of the Rhine and crush the Allied line before it could be reinforced. The Colmar pocket was the last significant German foothold in France, a stubborn bulge of territory the Wehrmacht refused to relinquish. Defended by roughly 22 divisions dug into brutal winter terrain. For the American 7th Army and the French 1st Army tasked with clearing it, the fighting through January 1945 was some of the coldest and cruelest of the entire European campaign. Men froze to death in foxholes, weapons jammed solid. Snow made every approach visible for hundreds of meters and every retreat equally exposed. Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, part of the storied 3rd Infantry Division, had already been fighting for months by the time it reached the woods outside Holtzwihr. Its commanding officer, a second lieutenant not yet 20 years old, had risen through the ranks the hard way, from private to staff sergeant to battlefield commission, earning that promotion the previous October after single-handedly destroying a German machine gun position in the Vosges Mountains. By January his company numbered perhaps 40 effective men, a fraction of its paper strength, whittled down by months of continuous combat across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and now France. The problem facing them at Holtzwihr was stark and, on paper, close to hopeless. A depleted infantry company, dug into a tree line with limited anti-tank capability, was about to be struck by a combined force of armor and infantry several times its size, in open snow, with no natural cover between the German start line and the American position. Existing doctrine offered few good answers to a scenario like this. American infantry companies of the period carried bazookas capable of damaging, but rarely destroying, the frontal armor of a Tiger or Panzer IV at any reasonable range. Artillery support existed, but it depended entirely on forward observers surviving long enough and communicating clearly enough to keep the guns accurate as the range closed. The tank destroyers attached to support such positions, vehicles like the M10, carried a 3-inch gun capable of knocking out German armor, but they were lightly protected themselves, built on the principle of speed and firepower rather than survivability, and a single well placed round from a German tank could, and frequently did, blew one up in seconds. When the 6 German tanks and their supporting infantry began their advance on Company B that morning, the maths was simple and merciless. 40 exhausted men, 1 damaged tank destroyer, and open ground offered almost nothing in the way of a conventional solution. There was no clever new weapon waiting in reserve at Holtzwihr, no secret innovation rushed from a research establishment to save the day. What saved Company B, if anything did, was a single decision made in the space of a few seconds by the man left standing nearest the burning tank destroyer once his men had withdrawn. The M10 Wolverine that Murphy climbed onto was, by January 1945, already an aging design, built on a Sherman chassis and armed with a 3-inch gun in an open-topped turret, a configuration chosen to keep weight and cost down, but one that left its crew dangerously exposed to shell fragments, small arms fire, and the weather alike. Mounted on the rear of that turret, on a simple pintle, sat a Browning 50 caliber heavy machine gun, the same weapon used on American aircraft and armored vehicles throughout the war, firing rounds roughly the length of a man's hand at a cyclic rate of around 600 a minute, each strike capable of punching through light cover and inflicting devastating wounds at any range under a kilometer. It was never designed to be operated as an infantry support weapon by a single man standing exposed on the deck of a vehicle that might explode beneath him. But that is precisely what it became that morning. Murphy had, before mounting the tank destroyer, already been doing the less glamorous but equally vital work of the fight, standing at his forward command post with a field telephone, calling in coordinates to the artillery battalions behind him, walking high, explosive rounds onto the advancing German infantry with the kind of precision that comes from months of practice under fire. That work alone, invisible and unglamorous as it was already inflicting real casualties on the attacking force before a single shot was fired from the tank destroyer. It is worth pausing on this, because the image of a lone man with a machine gun tends to eclipse the quieter fact that Murphy fought this battle simultaneously as an artillery observer and as an infantryman, coordinating destruction from miles away, even as he prepared to meet it face to face. When the tank destroyer beside him was hit and its crew forced to abandon it, Murphy made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He climbed up onto the burning vehicle, a machine that by every reasonable expectation could explode at any moment as flames reached its ammunition stores, and he took hold of the 50 caliber gun. From that position, elevated slightly above the surrounding snow, with no armor, no cover, and flames beneath his boots, he had a clear field of fire across the entire approach the German infantry were using. He kept directing artillery by telephone with one hand while firing the machine gun with the other, a piece of battlefield multitasking so implausible that it reads, even in the dry language of the official citation, like something invented for effect rather than something that actually happened. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know, and it costs nothing but a tap. For close to an hour, the fighting that followed was less a battle than a siege of one man. German infantry attempted to work around his flanks, using folds in the ground and drifts of snow for cover, and on at least one occasion a squad managed to creep to within 10 meters of his position before Murphy spotted and eliminated them. Soldiers attacked him, according to the account later recorded in his Medal of Honor citation, from 3 directions simultaneously, using rifles, machine pistols, and whatever else they carried, while the tanks themselves, deprived of the infantry screen they needed to advance safely against a defended position, began to hesitate and then to fall back. Murphy was wounded in the leg during the fighting. He did not stop. He continued firing until his ammunition for the machine gun was finally exhausted, at which point, and only then, he climbed down and made his way back to what remained of his company. What is genuinely documented here, drawn from the official citation and from multiple later interviews, is the broad shape of events, the withdrawal order, the burning tank destroyer, the machine gun, the sustained close-range fighting, the wound, and the eventual German withdrawal. What is harder to establish with precision, as with most single, combat accounts from chaotic winter battles, is the exact number of German casualties Murphy personally inflicted from that position, as opposed to those killed by the artillery fire he had already called in. The official citation credits him with killing or wounding approximately 50 German soldiers during the overall action, a figure that later popular accounts sometimes rounded up or conflated with the total strength of the attacking force. The wider figure often quoted, of roughly 250 Germans advancing against him, refers to the estimated size of the attacking force as a whole, not to a confirmed body count, and it is worth being honest about that distinction rather than letting the more dramatic number stand unchallenged. What is beyond dispute is what happened next. Murphy refused medical attention when he reached his men. Instead, wounded and out of ammunition, he organized what remained of Company B into an immediate counterattack, one that succeeded in pushing the shaken German force back and holding the position at Holtzwihr. It was this combination, the solitary stand and the counterattack that followed it, that earned him the Medal of Honor. The citation for which describes his conduct in language rarely used even in that most understated of official documents, crediting him with indomitable courage and a refusal to yield an inch of ground that saved his company from a devastating attack. Compared with other celebrated feats of individual gallantry from the same war, Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr is unusual for how little specialized equipment was involved. German accounts of comparable last stands, where isolated soldiers or small crews held defensive positions against overwhelming odds on the Eastern Front, often involved fixed fortifications, prepared bunkers, or purpose-built anti-tank weapons designed for exactly that role. Murphy had none of these advantages. He had a burning vehicle that could have killed him at any second, a machine gun never intended for that use, a telephone line to the guns behind him, and roughly 50 minutes in which everything had to go right. Among American Medal of Honor recipients of the European campaign, his action stands out not for technological ingenuity, but for its sheer improvisation, the sense that a man used whatever happened to be within arm's reach and simply refused to stop using it. The material impact of that single hour is, in truth, difficult to separate from its psychological effect, both on the Germans who experienced it and on the Americans who heard about it afterwards. Company B held its position and later took part in the wider push that cleared the Colmar pocket entirely by early February 1945, a campaign that removed the last significant German presence west of the Rhine in that sector. Murphy's stand did not single-handedly win that campaign, and it would be a mistake to claim otherwise, but it prevented the collapse of one company's position at a critical moment, and it did so at a cost to Murphy of a leg wound that, combined with the accumulated toll of nearly 3 years of continuous combat, left him plagued by chronic pain and what would today be recognized as post-traumatic stress for the rest of his life. Murphy went on to become the most decorated American combat soldier of the Second World War, holding, by war's end, every combat award for valor that the United States Army could bestow, along with decorations from France and Belgium. He was not yet 21 years old when the war ended. He later became a Hollywood actor, appearing in dozens of films including a 1955 adaptation of his own memoir, To Hell and Back, in which he played himself, a decision that reportedly left him deeply uncomfortable, reliving on camera the events that had already begun to haunt his sleep. He spoke openly, unusually so for his era, about what the war had done to him psychologically, and he is remembered today not only as a battlefield hero, but as an early and outspoken advocate for the recognition and treatment of what soldiers now call post-traumatic stress disorder. He died in a light aircraft crash in 1971 at the age of 45 and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, where his grave remains one of the most visited in the entire cemetery, second only to that of President Kennedy. Return, for a moment, to that ridge outside Holtzwihr, to the snow, the burning vehicle, and the single figure standing on it. Strip away everything that came afterwards. The films, the medals, the fame, and what remains is a boy of 19 who should, by any reasonable calculation, have died there. He did not run. He climbed onto a vehicle that could have killed him before a single German bullet did, and for nearly an hour he became, almost single-handedly, the difference between his company's survival and its destruction. He was wounded and kept fighting. He ran out of ammunition and organized a counterattack anyway. What he achieved that morning cannot be reduced to a weapon or an invention, because there was no innovation here beyond the choice to stay when every reasonable instinct said to run. That, in the end, is the whole of the story, and it is enough. A farm boy from Texas, alone on a burning tank, held a line that should not have held, and walked away to become a legend he never entirely wanted to be.